Greetings, this is video 9 of the poem Savitri by Sri Aurobindo, Canto 7, The Descent into Night. Canto 7 of Book 2. A mind absolved from life, made calm to know, a heart divorced from the blindness and the pang, the seal of tears, the bond of ignorance. He turned to find that wide world failure's cause. Away he looked from nature's visible face, and sent his gaze into the viewless vast, the formidable unknown infinity, asleep behind the endless coil of things, that carries the universe in its timeless breadths, and ripples up its being are our lives. The worlds are built by its unconscious breath, and matter and mind are its figures or its powers. Our waking thoughts are the output of its dreams. The veil was rent that covers nature's depths. He saw the fount of the world's lasting pain, and the mouth of the black pit of ignorance. The evil guarded at the roots of life raised up its head and looked into his eyes. On a dim bank where dies subjective space, from a dark ridge overlooking all that is, a tenebrous awakened nescience, her wide blank eyes, wondering at time and form, stared at the inventions of the living void and the abyss whence our beginnings rose. Behind appeared a gray-carved mask of night, watching the birth of all created things, a hidden puissance conscious of its force, a vague and lurking presence everywhere, a contrary doom that threatens all things made, a death figuring as the dark seed of life seemed to engender and to slay the world. Then from the somber mystery of the gulfs, and from the hollow bosom of the mask, something crept forth that seemed a shapeless thought. A fatal influence upon creatures stole, whose lethal touch pursued the immortal spirit. On life was laid the haunting finger of death, and overcast with error, grief, and pain, the soul's native will for truth and joy and light. A deformation coiled that claimed to be the being's very turn, nature's true drive. A hostile and perverting mind at work in every corner ensconced of conscious life, corrupted truth with her own formulas. Interceptor of the listening of the soul, afflicting knowledge with the hue of doubt, it captured the oracles of the occult gods, effaced the signposts of life's pilgrimage, canceled the firm rock edicts graved by time, and the foundations of the cosmic law, erected its bronze pylons of misrule. Even light and love by that cloaked danger spell turned from the brilliant nature of the gods to fallen angels and misleading sons, became themselves a danger and a charm, a perverse sweetness, heaven-born malefice. Its power could deform divinest things. A wind of sorrow breathed upon the world. All thought with falsehood was besieged, all act stamped with defect or with frustration's sign, all high attempt with failure or vain success, but none could know the reason of his fall. The gray mask whispered, and, though no sound was heard, yet in the ignorant heart a seed was sown, that bore black fruit of suffering, death, and bale. Out of the chill steps of a bleak unknown, invisible, wearing the night's gray mask. Arrived the shadowy, dreadful messengers, invaders from a dangerous world of power, ambassadors of evil's absolute. In silence the inaudible voices spoke. Hands that none saw planted the fatal grain. No form was seen, yet a dire work was done. An iron decree and crooked uncials written imposed a law of sin and adverse fate. Life looked at him with changed and somber eyes. Her beauty he saw, and the yearning her heart in things, that with a little happiness is content, answering to a small ray of truth or love. He saw her gold sunlight and her far blue sky, her green of leaves and hue and scent of flowers, and the charm of children and the love of friends, and the beauty of women and the kindly hearts of men, but saw too the dreadful powers that drive her moods, and the anguish she has strewn upon her ways. Fate waiting on the unseen steps of men, and her evil and sorrow and last gift of death. A breath of disillusion and decadence corrupting, watched for life's maturity, and made to rot the full grain of the soul. Progress became a purveyor of death. A world that clung to the law of a slain light, cherished the putrid corpses of dead truths, hailed twisted forms as things free, new, and true. Beauty from ugliness and evil drank, feeling themselves guests at a banquet of the gods, and tasted corruption like a high-spiced food. A darkness settled on the heavy air. It hunted the bright smile from nature's lips, and slew the native confidence in her heart, and put fear's crooked look in her eyes. The lust that warps the spirit's natural good, replaced by a manufactured virtue and vice. The frank, spontaneous impulse of the soul, afflicting nature with a dual's lie, their twin values wedded a forbidden zest, made evil a relief from spurious good. The ego battened on a righteousness and sin, and each became an instrument of hell. It rejected heaps by a monotonous road. The old simple delights were left to lie on the wasteland of life's descent into night. All glory of life was dimmed, tarnished with doubt. All beauty ended in an aging face. All power was dubbed a tyranny cursed by God, and truth a fiction needed by the mind. The chase of joy was now a tired hunt. All knowledge was left a questioning ignorance. As from a womb obscure he saw emerge the body and visage of a dark unseen, hidden behind the fair outsides of life. Its dangerous commerce is our suffering's cause. Its breath is a subtle poison in men's hearts. All evil starts from that ambiguous face. A peril haunted now the common air. The world grew full of menacing energies, and whenever turned for help or hope his eyes, in field and house, in street and camp and mart, he met the prowl and stealthy come and go of armed, disquieting-bodied influences. A march of figures dark and nude alarmed the air with grandiose unease. Appalling footsteps drew invisibly near. Shapes that were threats invaded the dreamlight. And ominous beings passed him on the road, whose very gaze was a calamity. A charm and sweetness, sudden and formidable, faces that raised alluring lips and eyes, approached him, armed with beauty like a snare, but hid a fatal meaning in each line, and could in a moment dangerously change. But he alone discerned that screened attack. A veil upon the inner vision lay. A force was there that hid its dreadful steps. All was belied, yet thought itself the truth. All were beset but knew not of the siege, for none could see the authors of their fall. Aware of some dark wisdom still withheld, that was the seal and warrant of his strength, he followed the track of dim tremendous steps, returning to the night from which they came, a tract he reached unbuilt and owned by none. There all could enter, but none stay for long. It was a no-man's land of evil air, a crowded neighborhood without one home, a borderland between the world and hell. There unreality was nature's lord. It was a space where nothing could be true, for nothing was what it had claimed to be. A high appearance wrapped a spacious void, yet nothing would confess its own pretense, even to itself in the ambiguous heart. A vast deception was the law of things. Only by that deception they could live. An unsubstantial kneel guaranteed the falsehood of the forms this nature took, and made them seem a while to be and live. A borrowed magic drew them from the void. They took a shape and stuff that was not theirs, and showed a color that they could not keep, mirrors to a phantasm of reality. Each rainbow brilliance was a splendid lie. A beauty unreal graced a glamour face. Nothing could be relied on to remain. Joy nurtured tears, and good and evil proved, but never out of evil one plucked good. Love ended early in hate, delight killed with pain, truth into falsity grew, and death ruled life. A power that laughed at the mischiefs of the world, an irony that joined the world's contraries and flung them into each other's arms to strive, put a sardonic rictus on God's face. Aloof, its influence entered everywhere, and left a cloven hoof-mark on the breast. A twisted heart and a strange somber smile mocked the sinister comedy of life. Announcing the advent of a perilous form, an ominous tread softened its dire footfall that none might understand or be on guard. None heard until a dreadful grasp was close. Or else all augured a divine approach, an air of prophecy felt, a heavenly hope. Listened for a gospel, watched for a new star. The fiend was visible but cloaked in light. He seemed a helping angel from the skies. He armed untruth with scripture and the law. He deceived with wisdom, with virtue slew the soul, and led to perdition by the heavenward path. A lavish sense he gave of power and joy, and, when arose the warning from within, he reassured the ear with dulcet tones, or took the mind captive in its own net. His rigorous logic made the false seem true. Amazing the elect with holy lore, he spoke as with the very voice of God. The air was full of treachery and ruse. Truth-speaking was a stratagem in that place. Ambush lurked in a smile, and peril made safety its cover, truth its entry's gate. Falsehood came laughing with the eyes of truth. Each friend might turn an enemy or spy. The hand one clasped ensleeved a dagger stab, and an embrace could be doom's iron cage. Agony and danger stalked their trembling prey, and softly spoke as to a timid friend. Attack sprang suddenly, vehement and unseen. Fear leaped upon the heart at every turn, and cried out with an anguished, dreadful voice. It called for one to save, but none came near. All warily walked, for death was ever close, yet caution seemed a vain expense of care, for all that guarded proved a deadly net. And when after long suspense salvation came, and brought a glad relief disarming strength, it served as a smiling passage to worse fate. There was no truce and no safe place to rest. One dared not slumber or put off one's arms. It was a world of battle and surprise. All who were there lived for themselves alone. All warred against all, but with a common hate turned on the mind that sought some higher good. Truth was exiled lest she should dare to speak and hurt the heart of darkness with her light, or bring her pride of knowledge to blaspheme the settled anarchy of established things. Then the scene changed, but kept its dreadful core. Altering its form, the life remained the same. A capital was there without a state. It had no ruler, only groups that strove. He saw a city of ancient ignorance, founded upon a soil that knew not light. There each in his own darkness walked alone, or they agreed to differ in evil's paths, to live their own way for their own selves, or enforce a common lie and wrong. There ego was lord upon his peacock seat, and falsehood sat by him, his mate and queen. The world turned to them as heaven to truth and God. Injustice justified by firm decrees. The sovereign weights of errors legalized trade, but all the weights were false and none the same. Ever she watched with her balance and a sword, lest any sacrilegious word expose the sanctified formulas of her old misrule. In high professions rapt self-will walked wide, and license stalked, prating of order and right. There was no altar raised to liberty. True freedom was abhorred and hunted down. Harmony and tolerance nowhere could be seen. Each group proclaimed its dire and naked law. A frame of ethics knobbed with scriptural rules, or a theory passionately believed and praised, a table seemed of high heaven's sacred code. A formal practice mailed and iron-shod gave to a rude and ruthless warrior kind, drawn from the savage bowels of the earth, a proud stern poise of harsh nobility, a civic posture rigid and formidable. But all their private acts belied the pose. Ain't that the truth? Power and utility were their truth and right, and ego rapacity clawed its coveted good. Beaks pecked and talons tore all weaker prey. In their sweet secrecy of pleasant sins, nature they obeyed, and not a moralist God. Inconscient traders in bundles of contraries, they did what in others they would persecute. When their eyes looked upon their fellows' vice, an indignation flamed, a virtuous wrath, oblivious of their own deep-hid offense. Mob-like they stoned a neighbor caught in sin. A pragmatist judge within passed false decrees, posed worst inequities on equity's base, reasoned ill actions just, sanctioned the scale of the merchant ego's interest and desire. Thus was a balance kept the world could live. A zealot fervor pushed their ruthless cults. All faith not theirs bled, scourged as heresy. They questioned, captive, tortured, burned, or smote, and forced the soul to abandon right or die. Amid her clashing creeds and warring sects, religion sat upon a blood-stained throne. 100 tyrannies oppressed and slew, and founded unity upon fraud and force. Only what seemed was prized as real there. The ideal was a cynic's ridicule's butt. Hooted by the crowd, mocked by enlightened wits, spiritual seeking wandered outcasted, a dreamer's self-deceiving web of thought, or mad chimeria deemed or hypocrite's fake. Its passionate instinct trailed through minds obscure, lost in the circuits of ignorance. A lie was there, the truth, and truth a lie. Here must the traveler of the upward way, for daring hell's kingdoms wins the heavenly route, pause or pass slowly through that perilous space, a prayer upon his lips and the great name. If probed not all discernment's keen spear point, he might stumble into falsity's endless net. Over his shoulder often he must look back, like one who feels on his neck an enemy's breath, else stealing up behind a treasonous blow might prostrate, cast and pin to unholy soil, pierced through his back by evil's poignant stake. So might one fall on the Eternal's road, forfeiting the spirit's lonely chance and time, and no news of him reach the waiting gods, marked missing in the register of souls. His name the index of a failing hope, the position of a dead remembered star. Only were safe who kept God in their hearts, courage their armor, faith their sword. They must walk, the hand ready to smite, the eye to scout, casting a javelin regard in front, heroes and soldiers of the army of light. Hardly even so the grisly danger passed, released into a calmer, purer air. They dared at length to breathe and smile once more. Once more they moved beneath a real sun. Though hell claimed rule, the spirit still had power. This no man's land he passed without debate. Him the heights missioned, him the abyss desired. None stood across his way, no voice forbade. For swift and easy is the downward path, and now towards the night was turned his face. A greater darkness waited, a worse reign. If worse can be where all is evil's extreme. Yet to the cloaked, the uncloaked is naked worst. There God in truth and the supernal light has never been, or else had the power no more. As when one slips in a deep moment's trance, over mind's border into another world, he crossed a boundary whose stealthy trace eye could not see but only the soul feel. Into an armored fierce domain he came, and saw himself wandering like a lost soul amid grimed walls and savage slums of night. Around him crowded gray and squalid huts, neighboring proud palaces of perverted power, inhuman quarters and demonic wards. A pride in evil hugged its wretchedness. A misery haunting splendor pressed those fell-done suburbs of the cities of dream life. There life displayed to the spectator's soul the shadow depths of her strange miracle. The shadow depths of her strange miracle. A strong and fallen goddess without hope, obscured, deformed by some dire Gorgon spell, as might a harlot empress in a bow, nude, unashamed, exulting she upraised her evil face of perilous beauty and charm, and, drawing panic to a shuddering kiss twixt the magnificence of her fatal breasts, allured to the abyss the spirit's fall. Across his field of sight she multiplied, as on a scenic film or moving plate, the implacable splendor of her nightmare pomps. On the dark background of a soulless world, she staged between a lurid light and shade her dramas of the sorrow of the depths, written on the agonized nerves of living things, epics of horror and grim majesty, wry statues spat and stiffened in life's mud. A glut of hideous forms and hideous deeds, paralyzed pity in the hardened breast. In booths of sin and night repairs of vice, styled infamies of the body's concupiscence, and sordid imaginations etched in flesh, turned lust into a decorative art. Abusing nature's gift, her pervert skill immortalized the sown grain of living death. In a mud goblet poured the Bacchic wine, to a satyr gave the thyrsus of a god. Impure, sadistic, with grimacing mouths, gray foul inventions gruesome and macabre, came television from the gulfs of night. Her craft ingenious in monstrosity, impatient of all natural shape and poise, a gape of nude exaggerated lines, gave caricature a stark reality. And art parades of weird distorted forms, and gargoyle masks obscene and terrible, trampled to tormented postures and torn sense. An inexorable evil's worshipper, she made vileness great and sublimated filth, a dragon power of reptile energies and strange epiphanies of groveling force, and serpent grandeurs crouching in the mire drew adoration to a gleam of slime. All nature pulled out of her frame and base was twisted into an unnatural pose. Repulsion stimulated inert desire. Agony was made a red-spiced food for bliss. Hatred was trusted with the work of lust, and torture took the form of an embrace. A ritual anguish consecrated death. Worship was offered to the undivine, a new aesthesis of Inferno's art that trained the mind to love what the soul hates, imposed allegiance on the quivering nerves, and forced the unwilling body to vibrate. Too sweet and too harmonious to excite in that regime that soiled the being's core, beauty was banned, the heart's feeling dulled to sleep, and cherished in their place sensation's thrills. The world was probed for jets of sense appeal. Here cold material intellect was the judge, and needed sensual prick and jog and lash, that its hard dryness and dead nerves might feel some passion and power and acrid point of life. A new philosophy theorized evil's right, gloried in the shimmering rot of decadence, or gave a python force persuasive speech, and armed with knowledge the primeval brute. Over life and matter only brooding bowed, mind changed to the image of a rampant beast. It scrambled into the pit to dig for truth, and lighted its search with the subconscious flares. Thence bubbling rose, sullying the upper air, the filth and festering secrets of the abyss. This it called positive fact and real life. This now composed the fetid atmosphere. A wild beast's passion crept from secret night to watch its prey with fascinating eyes. Around him like a fire with sputtering tongues, there lolled and laughed a bestial ecstasy. The air was packed with longings, brute and fierce, crowding and stinging in a monstrous swarm, pressed with a noxious hum into the mind, thoughts that could poison nature's heavenliest breath. Forcing reluctant lids assailed the sight, acts that revealed the mystery of hell. All that was there was on this pattern made. A race possessed inhabited those parts. A force demonic lurking in man's depths, that heaves suppressed by the heart's human law, awed by the calm and sovereign eyes of thought, can in a fire and earthquake of the soul arise, and, calling to its native night, overthrow the reason, occupy the life, and stamp its hoof on nature's shaking ground. This was for them the being's flaming core, a mighty energy, a monster god, hard to the strong, implacable to the weak. It stared at the harsh, unpitying world it made with the stony eyelids of its fixed idea. Its heart was drunk with the dire hunger's wine. In others' suffering felt a thrilled delight, and of death and ruin the grandiose music heard. To have power, to be master, was the sole virtue and good. It claimed the whole world for evil's living room. Its party's grim totalitarian reign, the cruel destiny of breathing things. All on one plan was shaped and standardized under a dark dictatorship's breathless weight. In street and house, in councils and in courts, beings he met who looked like living men, and climbed in speech upon high wings of thought, but harbored all that is subhuman, vile, and lower than the lowest reptiles crawl. The reason meant for nearness to the gods, and uplift to heavenly scale by the touch of mind, only enhanced by its enlightening ray their inborn nature's wry monstrosity. Often a familiar visage studying joyfully encountered at some dangerous turn, hoping to recognize a look of light. His vision warned by the spirit's inward eye, discovered suddenly hell's trademark there, or saw with the inner sense that cannot err, In the semblance of a fair or virile form, the demon and the goblin and the ghoul. And insolence reigned of cold, stone-hearted strength, mighty, obeyed, approved by the Titan's law, the huge laughter of a giant cruelty, and fierce glad deeds of ogre violence. In that wide, cynic den of thinking beasts, one looked in vain for a trace of pity or love. There was no touch of sweetness anywhere, but only force and its acolytes, greed and hate. There was no help for suffering, none to save. None dared resist or speak a noble word. Armed with the aegis of tyrannic power, signing the edicts of her dreadful rule, and using blood and torture as a seal, darkness proclaimed her slogans to the world. A servile blinkered silence hushed the mind. A servile blinkered silence hushed the mind. Or only it repeated lessons taught, while mitred, holding the good shepherd's staff, falsehood enthroned on awed and prostrate hearts, the cults and creeds that organize living death and slay the soul on the altar of a lie. All were deceived or served their own deceit. Truth in that stifling atmosphere could not live. Their wretchedness belied its own joy, and fear and weakness hugged their abject depths. All that is low and sordid-thoughted, base, all that is drab and poor and miserable, breathed in a lax contentment its natural air, and felt no yearning of divine release. Arrogant, jibing at more luminous states, the people of the gulfs despised the sun. A barriered autocracy excluded light, fixed in its will to be its own grey self. It vaunted its norm unique and splendid type. It soothed its hunger with a plunderer's dream. Flaunting its cross of servitude like a crown, it clung to its dismal, harsh autonomy. A bull throat bellowed with its brazen tongue, its hard and shameless clamor filling space and threatening all who dared to listen to truth, claimed the monopoly of the battered ear. A deafened acquiescence gave its vote. A braggart dogmas shouted in the night, kept for the fallen soul once deemed a god, the pride of its abysmal absolute. A lone discoverer in these menacing realms, guarded like termite cities from the sun, oppressed mid crowd and tramp and noise and flare, passing from dusk to deeper dangerous dusk, he wrestled with powers that snatched from mind its light and smote from him their clinging influences. So he emerged in a dim, wall-less space, for now the peopled tracks were left behind. He walked between wide banks of failing eve. Around him grew a gaunt spiritual blank, a threatening waste, a sinister loneliness that left mind bare to an unseen assault, an empty page on which all that willed could write stark, monstrous messages without control. A traveling dot on downward roads of dusk, mid barren fields and barns and straggling huts, and a few crooked and phantasmal trees, he faced a sense of death and conscious void. But still a hostile life unseen was there, whose death-like poise resisting light and truth made living a bleak gap in nullity. He heard the grisly voices that deny, assailed by thoughts that swarmed like spectral hordes, a prey to the staring phantasms of the gloom, and terror approaching with its lethal mouth. Driven by a strange will, down, ever down, the sky above a communique of doom, he strove to shield his spirit from despair, but felt the horror of the growing night and the abyss rising to claim his soul. then seized the abodes of creatures and their forms, and solitude wrapped him in its voiceless folds. All vanished suddenly like a thought expunged. His spirit became an empty listening gulf, void of the dead illusion of a world. Nothing was left, not even an evil face. He was alone with the gray python night. A dense and nameless nothing, conscious, mute, which seemed alive but without body or mind, lusted all beings to annihilate, that it might be forever nude and sole, as in a shapeless beast's intangible jaws. Gripped, strangled by that lusting vicious blot, attracted to some black and giant mouth, and swallowing throat and a huge belly of doom, his being from its own vision disappeared, drawn towards depths that hungered for its fall. A formless void oppressed his struggling brain. A darkness grim and cold benumbed his flesh. A whispered gray suggestion chilled his heart. Hailed by a serpent force from its warm home, and dragged to extinction in bleak vacancy, life clung to its seat with cords of gasping breath. Lapped was his body by a tenebrous tongue. Existence smothered, travailed to survive. Hope strangled, perished in his empty soul. Belief and memory abolished, died, and all that helps the spirit in its course. There crawled through every tense and aching nerve, leaving behind its poignant, quaking trail, a nameless and unutterable fear. As the sea nears a victim bound and still, the approach alarmed his mind forever dumb, of an implacable eternity of pain inhuman and intolerable. This he must bear, his hope of heaven estranged. He must ever exist without extinction's peace, in a slow-suffering time and tortured space, and anguished nothingness his endless state. A lifeless vacancy was now his breast, and in the place where once was luminous thought, only remained like a pale, motionless ghost, an incapacity for faith and hope, and the dread conviction of a vanquished soul, immortal still but with its godhead lost, self-lost and God and touch of happier worlds. But he endured, stilled the vain terror, bore the smothering coils of agony and of fright. The peace returned and the soul's sovereign gaze. To the blank horror a calm light replied, immutable, undying and unborn. Mighty and mute the Godhead in him woke, and faced the pain and danger of the world. He mastered the tides of nature with a look. He met with his bare spirit naked hell. That's the end of Canto 7. And this is Canto 8, the world of falsehood, the mother of evil, and the sons of darkness. This does have a happy ending. Then could he see the hidden heart of night. The labor of its stark unconsciousness revealed the endless, terrible inane. A spiritless blank infinity was there, a nature that denied the eternal truth, and the vain braggart freedom of its thought hoped to abolish God and reign alone. There was no sovereign guest, no witness light. Unhelped it would create its own bleak world. Its large blind eyes looked out on demon acts. Its deaf ears heard the untruth. Its dumb lips spoke. Its huge, misguided fancy took vast shapes. In mindless sentience quivered with fierce conceits, engendering a brute principle of life. Evil and pain begot a monstrous soul. The anarchs of the formless depths arose, great titan beings of demonic powers, world egos racked with lust and thought and will, vast minds and lives without a spirit within, impatient architects of error's house, leaders of the cosmic ignorance and unrest, and sponsors of sorrow and mortality, embodied the dark ideas of the abyss. A shadow substance into emptiness came. Dim forms were born in the unthinking void, and eddies met and made an adverse space, in whose black folds being imagined hell. His eyes piercing the triple-plated gloom, identified their sight with its blind stare. Accustomed to the unnatural dark, they saw unreality made real and conscious night. A violent, fierce, and formidable world, an ancient womb of huge calamitous dreams, coiled like a larva in the obscurity that keeps it from the spear point of heaven's stars. It was a gate of false infinite, an eternity of disastrous absolutes, an immense negation of spiritual things. All once self-luminous in the spirit sphere, turned now into their own dark contraries, being collapsed into a pointless void that yet was a zero parent of the worlds. In conscience swallowed up the cosmic mind, produced a universe from its lethal sleep. Bliss into black coma fallen, insensible, coiled back to itself and God's eternal joy, through a false poignant figure of grief and pain, still dolorously nailed upon a cross, fixed in the soil of a dumb insentient world, where birth was a pang and death an agony, lest all too soon should change again to bliss. Thought sat, a priestess of perversity, on her black tripod of the triune snake, reading by opposite signs the eternal script, a sorceress reversing life's God frame. In darkling aisles with evil eyes for lamps, and fatal voices chanting from the apse, in strange infernal dim basilicals, intoning the magic of the unholy word, the ominous profound initiate performed the ritual of her mysteries. Their suffering was nature's daily food, allured to the anguished heart and flesh, and torture was the formula of delight. Pain mimicked the celestial ecstasy. There, good, a faithless gardener of God, watered with virtue the world's upas tree, and, careful of the outward word and act, engrafted his hypocrite blooms on native ill. All high things served their nether opposite. The forms of God sustained a demon cult. Heaven's face became a mask and snare of hell. There in the heart of vain phenomenon, in an enormous action's writhing core, he saw a shape illimitable and vague, sitting on death who swallows all things born. A chill fixed face with dire and motionless eyes, her dreadful trident in her shadowy hand outstretched, she pierced all creatures with one fate. When nothing was save matter without soul, and a spiritless hollow was the heart of time, then life first touched the insensible abyss, awaking the stark void to hope and grief. Her pallid beam smote the unfathomed night, in which God hid himself from his own view. In all things she sought their slumbering, mystic truth, the unspoken word that inspires unconscious forms. She groped in his deeps for an invisible law, fumbled in the dim subconscient for his mind, and strove to find a way for spirit to be. But from the night another answer came. A seed was in that nether matrix cast, a dumb, unprobed husk of perverted truth, a cell of an insentient infinite. A monstrous birth prepared its cosmic form in nature's titan embryo, ignorance. Then in a fatal and stupendous hour, something that sprang from the stark inconscient sleep, unwillingly begotten by the mute void, lifted its ominous head against the stars, overshadowing Earth with its huge body of doom. It chilled the heavens with the menace of a face. A nameless power, a shadowy will arose, immense and alien to our universe. In the inconceivable purpose none can gauge, a vast non-being robed itself with shape. The boundless nescience of the unconscious depths covered eternity with nothingness. A seeking mind replaced the seeing soul. Life grew into a huge and hungry death. The spirit's bliss was changed to cosmic pain. Assuring God's self-cowled neutrality, a mighty opposition conquered space. A sovereign ruling falsehood, death and grief, it pressed its fierce hegemony on the earth, disharmonizing the original style of the architecture of her fate's design. It falsified the primal cosmic will, and bound to struggle and dread vicissitudes, the long, slow process of the patient power, implanting error in the stuff of things, it made an ignorance of the all-wise law. It baffled the sure touch of life's hid sense, kept dumb the intuitive guide in matter's sleep, deformed the insect's instincts and the brute's, disfigured man's thought-born humanity. A shadow fell across the simple ray. Obscured was the truth light in the cavern heart that burns unwitnessed in the altar crypt, behind the still veilment's secrecy, companioning the Godhead of the shrine. Thus was the dire antagonist energy born, who mimes the eternal mother's mighty shape, and mocks her luminous infinity with a gray distorted silhouette in night, arresting the passion of the climbing soul. She forced on life a slow and faltering pace. Her hands deflecting and retarding weight is laid on the mystic evolution's curve. The tortuous line of her deceiving mind the gods see not, and man is impotent. Oppressing the God spark within the soul, she forces back to the beast the human fall. Yet in her formidable instinctive mind she feels the one grow in the heart of time. She sees the immortal shine through the human mold. Alarmed for her rule and full of fear and rage, she prowls around each light that gleams through the dark, casting its ray from the spirit's lonely tent, hoping to enter with fierce, stealthy tread, and in the cradle slay the divine child. Incalculable are her strength and ruse. Her touch is a fascination and a death. She kills her victim with his own delight. Even good she makes a hook to drag to hell. For her world runs to its agony. Often the pilgrim on the Eternal's road, ill-lit from clouds by the pale moon of mind, or in devious byways wandering alone, or lost in deserts where no path is seen, falls overpowered by her lion leap, a conquered captive under her dreadful paws, intoxicated by a burning breath, an amorous groan of a destroying mouth. Once a companion of the sacred fire, the mortal perishes to God and light. An adversary governs heart and brain, a nature hostile to the mother force. The self of life yields up its instruments to Titan and demonic agencies that aggrandize earth nature and disframe. A cowled fifth columnist is now thought's guide. His subtle defeatist murmur slays the faith. And, lodged in the breast, or whispering from outside, a lying inspiration fell and dark. A new order substitutes for the divine. A silence falls upon the spirit's heights. From the veiled sanctuary the god retires, empty and cold in the chamber of the bride. Empty and cold is the chamber of the bride. The golden nimbus now is seen no more. No longer burns the white spiritual ray, and hushed forever is the secret voice. Then by the angel of the vigil tower, a name is struck from the recording book. A flame that sang in heaven sinks quenched and mute. In ruin ends the epic of a soul. This is the tragedy of the inner death, when forfeited is the divine element, and only a mind and body live to die. For terrible agencies the Spirit allows, and there are subtle and enormous powers that shield themselves with the covering ignorance. Offspring of the gulfs, agents of the shadowy force, haters of light, intolerant of peace, aping to the thought the shining friend and guide, opposing in the heart the eternal will, they veil the occult uplifting harmonist. His wisdom's oracles are made our bonds. The doors of God they have locked with keys of greed, and shut out by the law his tireless grace. Along all nature's lines they have set their posts and intercept the caravans of light. Wherever the gods act, they intervene. A yoke is laid upon the world's dim heart. Masked are its beats from the supernal bliss, and the closed peripheries of brilliant mind block the fine entries of celestial fire. Always the dark adventurers seem to win. Nature they fill with evil's institutes, turn into defeats the victories of truth, proclaim as falsehoods the eternal laws, and load the dice of doom with wizard lies. The world's shrines they have occupied, usurped its thrones, in scorn of the dwindling chances of the gods, they claim creation as their conquered fief, and crown themselves the iron lords of time. Adepts of the illusion and the mask, the artificers of nature's fall and pain, have built their altars of triumphant night in the clay temple of terrestrial life. In the vacant precincts of the sacred fire, in front of the reredos in the mystic rite, facing the dim veilman none can pierce, intones his solemn hymn the mitred priest, invoking their dreadful presence in his breast, attributing to them the awful name. He chants the syllables of the magic text, and summons the unseen communion's acts, while twixt the incense and muttered prayer, all the fierce bale with which the world is racked is mixed in the foaming chalice of man's heart, and poured to them like sacramental wine. Assuming names divine they guide and rule. Opponents of the highest, they have come out of their world of soulless thought and power to serve by enmity the cosmic scheme. Night is their refuge and strategic base. Against the sword of flame, the luminous eye, bastion they live in massive forts of gloom, calm and secure in sunless privacy. No wandering ray of heaven can enter there. Armored, protected by their lethal masks, as in a studio of creative death, the giant sons of darkness sit and plan the drama of the earth, their tragic stage. All who would raise the fallen world must come under the dangerous arches of their power, for even the radiant children of the gods, to darken their privilege is an dreadful right. None can reach heaven who has not passed through hell. This too the travel of the worlds must dare. A warrior in the dateless dual strife, he entered into dumb despairing night, challenging the darkness with his luminous soul. Alarming with his steps the threshold gloom, he came into a fierce and dolorous realm, peopled by souls who never had tasted bliss, ignorant like men born blind who know not light. They could equate worst ill with highest good. Virtue was to their eyes a face of sin, and evil and misery were their natural state, a dire administration's penal code. Making of grief and pain the common law, decreeing universal joylessness, had changed life into a stoic sacrament and torture into a daily festival. An act was passed to chastise happiness. Laughter and pleasure were banned as deadly sins. A questionless mind was ranked as wise contentment. A dull heart silent apathy as peace. Sleep was not there. Torpor was the sole rest. Death came, but neither respite gave nor end. Always the soul lived on and suffered more. Ever he deeper probed that kingdom of pain. Around him grew the terror of a world of agony followed by worse agony, and in the terror a great wicked joy, glad of one's own and others' calamity. Their thought and life were a long punishment. The breath a burden and all hope a scourge, the body a field of torment, a masked unease. Repose was awaiting between pang and pang. This was the law of things none dreamed to change. A hard, somber heart, a harsh, unsmiling mind, rejected happiness like a cloying sweet. Tranquility was a tedium and ennui. Only by suffering life grew colorful. It needed the spice of pain, the salt of tears. If one could cease to be, all would be well. Else only fierce sensations gave some zest. A fury of jealousy burning the gnawed heart, the sting of murderous spite and hate and lust, the whisper that lures to the pit and treachery stroke through vivid spots on the dull aching hours. To watch the drama of infelicity, the writhing of creatures under the harrow of doom, and sorrow's tragic gaze into the night. And horror and the hammering heart of fear were the ingredients in time's heavy cup that pleased and helped to enjoy its bitter taste. Of such fierce stuff was made up life's long hell. These were the threads of the dark spider's web in which the soul was caught, quivering and wrapped. This was religion. This was nature's rule. In a fell chapel of iniquity, to worship a black, pitiless image of power, kneeling, one must cross hard-hearted stony courts, a pavement like a floor of evil fate. Each stone was a keen edge of ruthless force, and glued with the chilled blood from tortured breasts, the dry gnarled trees stood up like dying men, stiffened into a pose of agony. And from each window peered an ominous priest, chanting Te Deums for slaughter's crowning grace, uprooting cities, blasted human homes, burned, writhen bodies, the bombshells massacre. Our enemies are fallen, they sang. All who once stayed our will are smitten and dead. How great we are, how merciful art thou. Thus thought they to reach God's impassive throne, and him command whom all their acts opposed, magnifying their deeds to touch his skies, and make him an accomplice of their crimes. There no relenting pity could have place, but ruthless strength and iron moods had sway, a dateless sovereignty of terror and gloom. This took the figure of a darkened God, revered by the racked wretchedness he had made, who held in thrall a miserable world, and helpless hearts nailed to unceasing woe, adored the feet that trampled them into mire. In a world of sorrow and of hate, sorrow with hatred for its lonely joy, hatred with other sorrow for its feast. A bitter rictus curled the suffering mouth. A tragic cruelty saw its ominous chance. Hate was the black archangel of that realm. It glowed, a somber jewel in the heart, burning the soul with its malignant rays, and wallowed in its fell abysm of might. These passions even objects seemed to exude, for mind overflowed into the inanimate, that answered with the wickedness it received. Against their users used malignant powers, hurt without hands and strangely, suddenly slew, appointed as instruments of an unseen doom. Or they made themselves a fateful prison wall, where men condemned wake through the creeping hours, counted by the tollings of an ominous bell. An evil environment worsened evil souls. All things were conscious there, and all perverse. In that infernal realm he dared to press, even into its deepest pit and darkest core. Perturbed its tenebrous base, dared to contest its ancient privileged right and absolute force. In night he plunged to know her dreadful heart. In hell he sought the root and cause of hell. Its anguished gulfs opened in his own breast. He listened to the clamors of its crowded pain, the heartbeats of its fatal loneliness. Above was a chill of death eternity. In vague tremendous passages of doom he heard the goblin voice that guides to slay, and face the enchantments of the demon sign, and traverse the ambush of the opponent snake. In menacing tracks, in tortured solitudes, companionless he roamed through desolate ways, where the red wolf waits by the fordless stream, and death's black eagle screamed to the precipice, and met the hounds of Baal who hunt men's hearts, baying across the velds of destiny, in footless battlefields of the abyss. Fought shadowy combats in mute eyeless depths, assaults of hell endured and tightened strokes, and bore the fierce inner wounds that are slow to heal. A prisoner of a hooded magic force, captured and trailed in falsehood's lethal net, and often strangled in the noose of grief, or cast in the grim morass of swallowing doubt, or shut into pits of error and despair, he drank her poisoned draughts till none was left. In a world where neither hope nor joy could come, the ordeal he suffered of evil's absolute reign, he kept intact his spirit's radiant truth. Incapable of motion or of force, in matter's blank denial gulled and blind, pinned to the black inertia of our base, he treasured between his hands his flickering soul. His being ventured into the mindless void, intolerant gulfs that knew not thought nor sense. Thought ceased, sense failed, his soul still saw and knew. In atomic parcelings of the infinite, near to the dumb beginnings of lost self, he felt the curious small futility of the creation of material things. Or, stifled in the unconscious hollow dusk, he sounded the mystery dark and bottomless of the enormous and unmeaning deeps, whence struggling life in a dead universe rose. There, in the stark identity lost by mind, he felt the sealed sense of the insensible world, and a mute wisdom in the unknowing night. Into the abysmal secrecy he came, where darkness peers from her mattress, gray and nude, and stood on the last locked subconscious floor, where being slept unconscious of its thoughts, and built the world not knowing what it built. There, waiting its hour, the future lay unknown. There is the record of the vanished stars. There, in the slumber of the cosmic will, he saw the secret key of nature's change. A light was with him, an invisible hand was laid upon the error and the pain, till it became a quivering ecstasy, the shock of sweetness of an arm's embrace. He saw in night the eternal shadowy veil, knew death for a cellar in the house of life, in destruction felt creation's hasty pace, knew loss as the price of celestial gain, and hell as a shortcut to heaven's gates. But it's not the only shortcut to heaven's gates. Then in illusion's occult factory, and in the unconscious magic printing house, Torn were the formats of the primal night, and shattered the stereotypes of ignorance. Alive, breathing a deep spiritual breath, nature expunged her stiff mechanical code, and the articles of the bound soul's contract. Falsehood gave back to truth her tortured shape. Annulled were the tables of the law of pain, and in their place grew luminous characters. The skillful penman's unseen finger wrote his swift, intuitive calligraphy. Earth's forms were made his divine documents. The wisdom-embodied mind could not reveal. In conscience chased from the world's voiceless breast, transfigured were the fixed schemes of reasoning thought. Arousing consciousness in things inert, he imposed upon dark atom and dumb mass the diamond script of the imperishable. Inscribed on the dim heart of fallen things a paean song of the free infinite, and the name, foundation of eternity, and traced in the awake exultant cells, in the ideographs of the ineffable, the lyric of love that waits through time, and the mystic volume of the book of bliss. And the message of the superconscient fire. Then life beat pure in the corporeal frame. The infernal gleam died and could slay no more. Hell split across its huge abrupt facade, as if a magic building were undone. Night opened and vanished like a gulf of dream. Into being's gap scooped out as empty space, in which she had filled the place of absent God, there poured a wide, intimate, and blissful dawn. Healed were all things that time's torn heart had made, and sorrow could live no more in nature's breast. Division ceased to be, for God was there. The soul lit the conscious body with its ray. Matter and spirit mingled and were one. Matter and spirit mingled and were one. That is the end of Canto 8. I think this is video 8. I'm not sure. The end of Canto 8.